Tonight, in this podcast, we are looking at the quiet weight of unmade decisions. That profound, almost silent feeling of watching time pass while you wait for the perfect moment to act. And how, without you even really noticing, that waiting slowly becomes your entire life.
It really does. It just creeps up on you.
Right. And so our mission in this deep dive is to explore this really profound human experience that, behavioral scientists call it the intention-action gap.
Exactly.
And to do this, we're going to draw from behavioral economics, neuroscience, literature, and just, the raw honesty of people who are trying to navigate it.
Because it is a deeply universal space to find yourself in,
Yeah.
that invisible territory between the life we intend to live and the actions we actually take.
Yeah.
And exploring it really requires us to look at the psychological friction that keeps us rooted in place.
I think to really understand what this feels like from the inside, before we get into any data or science,
Yeah.
I want you to imagine a scene. You're sitting in a car, the gas tank is completely full, the engine is running, just humming quietly beneath you. And mounted right there on the dashboard is a GPS. But the screen just says, recalculating.
Oh, wow.
And it has been saying this for 30 years.
That is such a heavy, haunting image. I mean, the system is engaged, the potential energy is totally there, but there is absolutely no forward motion.
Right, because the thing is, the GPS isn't broken.
No.
The car is functioning perfectly. The driver just never entered a destination. Every single time the prompt appears on the screen asking, where do you want to go? The driver stares at that blinking cursor and feels this overwhelming wave of nausea.
Like a physical rejection of the moment of choice?
Exactly. So they close the screen. They tell themselves, I'll choose tomorrow. Like tomorrow the fog will lift. Tomorrow the right destination will just magically reveal itself and the decision will feel easy.
But tomorrow is just today wearing a different mask.
Yes. And eventually, the gas just runs out. The driver sits in a dead car on the side of a road they never even traveled. And this is actually a metaphor drawn from Maxim Gorky's novel, A Useless Man.
Right, describing the character Matvey.
Yeah, and I just think it captures this paralyzing dread so perfectly.
What really stands out to me about that metaphor is the nausea you mentioned.
Yeah.
That physical and emotional revulsion to committing to a path, it maps so perfectly onto the real-world confessions we see when people are finally honest about their struggles.
Like what?
Well, for instance, there's this deeply vulnerable admission from a user in a Reddit thread dedicated to self-improvement. The user wrote, "I don't think I'm bad at decisions. I think I avoid them until they make themselves."
Wow. I avoid them until they make themselves.
Yeah,
That hits incredibly close to home.
it really does.
But let's push on that a little bit. Is avoiding a decision actually a way of letting it make itself, or is it something else entirely? Because, it feels like a passive act. It feels like you are just floating.
It definitely feels passive to the person doing it, but that is the illusion, right?
Okay.
The slow creeping realization that this Reddit user was beginning to understand is that avoiding a choice is still fundamentally a choice.
Silence is a vote.
Exactly. Silence is a vote. We tell ourselves we're just keeping our options open. We frame our hesitation as being thoughtful or careful or prudent.
Like we're just gathering more information.
Right. We build a narrative that we are gathering data, but underneath that protective narrative, the raw truth is that we are just terrified of picking wrong.
Okay, let's unpack this, because there is a specific word for this exact phenomenon, isn't there? We aren't the first generation to sit in the running car staring at the recalculating screen.
Not at all. It's actually an ancient concept. The Greeks called it akrasia.
Akrasia.
Yeah. It translates roughly to a lack of self-control or like a weakness of will.
Interesting.
It describes the paradoxical human experience where you knowingly choose an inferior option. And in the context we're discussing, the inferior option is doing nothing at all.
You're acting against your own better judgment.
Exactly. And the agonizing part is that you are fully aware that you're doing it.
Wait, I want to challenge that definition a bit. Weakness of will, or lack of self-control, isn't that just a fancy philosophical excuse for being lazy?
It sounds like you're right.
Yeah, if I know I should start a retirement fund or have a difficult conversation with a partner and I choose to just sit on the couch and watch television instead, why do we need an ancient Greek word to dress up what is essentially just my own laziness?
Because labeling it as laziness stops the inquiry dead in its tracks.
How so?
Well, laziness implies an absence of desire or a deficit of motivation, but the person experiencing akrasia is intensely motivated. They're agonizing over the unmade choice.
Well, that's true. The anxiety is
Oh,
there.
right. The philosopher Amélie Rorty provides a brilliant modern distillation of this that separates it entirely from simple laziness. She argues that acrasia isn't just one single monolithic flaw in human character. Instead, she breaks it down into a systematic breakdown in the practical reasoning process. She identifies 4 distinct stages where this breakdown can happen.
4 stages of getting stuck. Walk us through those. Because if it isn't laziness, I really want to know exactly where the engine is failing.
Let's break them down. First, there's the acrasia of direction or aim. This is how we set our goals in the first place.
So like the target itself is the problem.
Yeah, if your aim is vague, like, I want to be better with my finances, it is almost impossible to execute.
Got it.
Second, there is the acrasia of interpretation. This is how we interpret our current situations under different circumstances.
Slow down there. Give me an example of the acrasia of interpretation. What does it mean to interpret a situation poorly?
Okay, imagine you have a goal to save money, but your friend invites you to an expensive dinner.
Classic scenario.
Right. The acrasia of interpretation happens when you rationalize the exception. You tell yourself, well, it's a special occasion and I've had a hard week, so this doesn't really count against my saving goal.
Oh.
You misinterpret the reality of the choice to protect your immediate comfort.
The rationalization machine kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what are the next 2 stages?
The third is the acrasia of action. This is the one we are most familiar with.
Okay.
You have the right aim, you interpret the situation correctly, you know exactly what you need to do, but when the moment arrives to actually choose the action, you freeze.
You just do it.
You just don't do it. And finally, the fourth stage is the acrasia of character. This is how we shape our habits over time.
So it becomes who you are.
Yes. It is the cumulative effect of failing at the previous 3 stages until inaction simply becomes your default identity.
So it's like the engine is running, the gears are shifting, but the transmission slips at different points for different people.
Okay.
And if it slips enough times, it just becomes who you are, the
Yep.
acrasia of character.
Exactly.
Today, behavioral scientists have a more modern translation for this ancient problem, don't they?
They do. In behavioral science, this is known as the intention-action gap.
The intention-action gap.
Or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the knowing-doing gap. And the core insight here is staggering when you look at the data. People consistently, predictably fail to do things they fully intend to do.
Really? How often?
Well, intention only predicts 30 to 40% of our actual behavior.
Let's just sit with that number for a second. Intention only accounts for 30 to 40%.
Yeah.
That means 60 to 70% of the time, what we intend to do has absolutely no bearing on what we actually do.
You're bearing.
If I intend to change careers or intend to start a project, statistically, the intention itself is barely making a dent in the outcome.
Exactly. We place so much moral weight on our intentions. We think that if we just intend hard enough, the action will inevitably follow.
Right, like willpower is enough.
But the intention-action gap proves that intention is a fragile bridge. It just cannot bear the weight of human complexity on its own.
Yeah.
And this raises an important question, right? What is actually happening in the mind to cause this paralysis? Why is the gap so vast?
That is exactly what I want to know. What is going on in our brains that makes us freeze when we hold all the cards? If we have the intention, and we aren't just being lazy, what is the invisible wall we keep hitting?
To understand the invisible wall, we have to look at prospect theory.
Prospect theory.
Yeah, this was developed by the legendary behavioral economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
Oh, sure.
It completely reshaped how we understand decision-making under risk and uncertainty. Prospect theory tells us that, contrary to classical economics, we do not make decisions based on absolute rational outcomes.
We aren't just doing the math.
Right. We don't act like computers calculating the maximum total value. Instead, we make decisions based on a reference point, which is usually our current situation.
So we evaluate everything relative to where we are standing right now. It is all subjective.
Precisely. Your current status quo is the 0 point on the graph. Every possible choice is evaluated not on where it will eventually take you, but on how it deviates from where you're standing this very second. And here is the catch. This is the core component of the theory that explains our paralysis. Loss aversion.
Loss aversion. I've heard the term, but how does it actually function in the moment of making a choice?
It is the discovery that losses hurt us mathematically and emotionally far more than equivalent gains feel good.
Really?
Yeah. The value function in our brains is entirely asymmetrical. It's steeper for losses than it is for gains. To put it in a real-world perspective, imagine the psychological pain of losing $1,000.
Ugh, that would ruin my week.
Right. For an average individual, the emotional devastation of that loss can only be neutralized or compensated by the pleasure of earning $2,000.
Oh, really? A 2-to-1 ratio.
A 2-to-1 ratio.
So if I drop a $100 bill on the street, the anger and frustration I feel is so intense that finding another $100 bill wouldn't even fix it. I would have to find $200 just to feel emotionally neutral again.
That is exactly how the human brain processes value. The pain of losing is roughly twice as powerful as the joy of gaining. Now, apply that to making a life decision.
Okay.
If you're standing at your reference point, your current job, your current relationship, your current financial strategy, any change involves giving something up.
So I'm standing at my reference point. The thought of stepping backward, of making a choice that results in a loss, is so agonizing that the prospect of stepping forward has to be overwhelmingly, undeniably amazing to even get me to move.
Exactly.
If it's just a little bit better, my brain rejects the risk. No wonder we just stand still.
You've hit the exact mechanism of the paralysis. We demand an unreasonable premium of guaranteed success before we are willing to abandon the safety of the status quo.
Wow.
And this effect is compounded by another layer of Kahneman and Tversky's work called myopic loss aversion.
Myopic meaning nearsighted.
Yes. This is our natural, hardwired tendency to focus heavily on short-term losses rather than long-term gains.
So we are incredibly nearsighted when it comes to evaluating risk. How does that show up in the real world?
We see it vividly in financial choices, particularly in something behavioral economists call the equity premium puzzle.
The equity premium puzzle.
Yeah. If you look at historical data, stocks have consistently exceeded profits compared to bonds over extended periods. It's not a secret. The data is clear.
Sure.
Yet young investors, people with decades ahead of them to recover from volatility, often avoid stocks entirely, or they abandon them the second there is a minor market dip.
Even though all the long-term data favors staying in the market, they're looking at the red line on their app today, and the pain of that immediate short-term loss overrides the logical knowledge of the 20-year gain.
Exactly.
They are sacrificing the long-term reality to escape the short-term discomfort.
And prospect theory outlines another fascinating way our brains distort reality to keep us stuck. It's called the fourfold pattern of risk. Part of this pattern explains how we process probabilities, specifically our obsession with small probabilities.
What do you mean by an obsession with small probabilities?
Think about a decision you are afraid to make. Maybe starting a new venture.
Okay.
Objectively, there might be a highly probable positive outcome. But there is also a 1% chance of total failure.
Right.
A rational actor would weigh that 1% appropriately. But the human brain overweights that tiny probability. We let that 1% chance of failure paralyze us, acting internally as if it were a 5% or 10% chance.
We blow it out of proportion.
Yes. The tiny fraction takes up massive emotional real estate in our minds, while we simultaneously underweight the highly probable positive outcomes.
So if there's a 1% chance a decision leads to a loss, my loss aversion flares up, my myopia focuses on the immediate risk, and my brain magnifies that 1% until it covers the entire windshield.
Exactly.
I'm terrified of a ghost of a chance. So we have this intense fear of loss, we magnify the smallest risks, and we evaluate everything from the comfort of the status quo. It paints a pretty bleak picture of our ability to choose.
It's tough.
But surely it's not just a subconscious math problem. There has to be a purely energetic component to this, isn't there?
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't feel like I'm doing complex probability weighting. I just feel exhausted.
You are absolutely right, and behavioral science accounts for that too. We have to look at cognitive load and decision fatigue.
Okay, cognitive load.
Every single choice we make throughout the day draws from a finite mental resource. Choosing what to eat for breakfast, deciding how to phrase a response to a difficult email, navigating traffic, processing a complex life problem, it all uses the exact same reservoir of cognitive energy.
It's all pulling from the same battery.
Yes.
Yeah.
And by the end of a typical day, decision fatigue sets in. Your cognitive load has maxed out the system.
And then what happens?
This leaves you with poor judgment, a drastically diminished capacity for any further critical thinking, and an overwhelming, almost primal desire to just avoid deciding altogether. The brain simply wants to power down.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because these aren't just abstract economic theories or laboratory experiments. This is how life actually happens on the ground.
Yeah.
I want to introduce you to a woman named Maria. Her story comes directly from research on the behavioral economics of compliance, and I think it perfectly illustrates the relentless friction of daily life.
Let's hear it.
Maria works 80 hours a week cleaning hotel rooms. She is grinding to keep her life together, and she completely intends to submit her work verification to the state in order to keep her health care coverage.
Okay, so the intention is there.
She has the documents, she has the pay stubs photographed on her phone, she knows exactly what the deadline is.
So according to Emily Rorty's first stage, the aim is set perfectly.
Exactly. The intention is flawless.
Huh.
But watch the pattern of life unfold over a single week.
Hmm?
On Tuesday, her 9-year-old daughter comes home sick from school, requiring her to scramble for childcare. On Wednesday, she works an unexpected double shift because a colleague calls out sick and she needs the money.
Life happens.
Right. On Thursday, her mother needs a ride to the doctor across town. On Friday, she realizes the utility bill is past due, so she spends her one and only lunch break on hold with the electric company, trying to negotiate a payment plan.
Cognitive load is just maxed out.
Completely. Over the weekend, she's working, doing laundry, buying groceries, and trying to keep her family functioning. Finally, on Monday morning, she remembers the healthcare deadline. She grabs her phone, but when she goes to the portal, it asks her to reset her password.
Oh, no.
She can't remember the answer to a security question she set 3 years ago. She has to call a helpline, but the wait time is 40 minutes, and she is already running late for her shift. She hangs up. By Tuesday evening, the crisis of the immediate present has taken over, and she has forgotten again.
And the friction is simply too high. The cognitive battery is entirely empty.
Yes, she misses the deadline, she loses her health care, and the tragic part is that the automated system flags her as non-compliant.
Like it's her fault.
Exactly. Yeah. Somewhere in a state database, a statistic is recorded suggesting that people like Maria just don't take their obligations seriously, or they don't care enough to follow the rules.
Yeah.
But the reality
Is that she experienced profound cognitive exhaustion, and she fell victim to something behavioral scientists call the planning fallacy.
the planning fallacy.
Yeah.
What is that exactly? Because it sounds like she planned to do it, life just got in the way.
The planning fallacy is our systematic tendency to underestimate how long a task will take to complete and to overestimate our future available time and energy.
Oh.
When Maria intended to submit those forms, she wasn't lying to herself, but she planned for the best-case scenario. She imagined a future where she had a quiet hour, full battery on her phone, and no interruptions.
Right.
But she encountered average-case reality. The sick kid, the double shift, the forgotten password.
We always assume our future selves will have more energy and fewer problems than our current selves. We write checks that our future energy levels simply cannot cash.
Precisely. Maria's story is a profound example of how our systems, bureaucracies, corporate structures, even our own personal schedules, assume we are rational, cognitively abundant actors. They're designed for people with infinite willpower, when in fact we are stressed, present-focused, and cognitively depleted humans.
And we see these similar patterns of paralysis and depletion in entirely different contexts, too. It isn't just about poverty or bureaucracy. It happens to people with an abundance of resources.
Absolutely. Take analysis paralysis and the paradox of choice, a concept beautifully articulated by the psychologist Barry Schwartz.
Right, the paradox of choice.
In modern society, we are drowning in infinite choices. We have endless options for careers, consumer goods, retirement accounts, and even romantic relationships on dating apps.
There's always another swipe.
Exactly. The cultural narrative tells us that this abundance of choice empowers us, but Schwartz argues that it actually does the opposite. It creates an agonizing cognitive loop.
But wait, how can more options be a bad thing? If I go to the store and there are 50 types of cereal, I have a higher chance of finding the exact one I want. Shouldn't more options equal more freedom and better outcomes?
It seems intuitive, but it is a trap. When you have 2 options, the cognitive load is light.
Okay.
When you have 50 options, your brain has to evaluate the opportunity cost of 49 rejected choices. The burden of making the perfect decision becomes crushing.
Oh, wow.
Schwartz argues that this endless maximization actually creates deep anxiety, decision fatigue, and ultimate dissatisfaction with whatever you do choose, because you're always wondering if one of the other 49 options would have been slightly better.
So the abundance of choice drains our mental resources, accelerating that decision fatigue we talked about earlier. And when we finally do make a choice, and it turns out to be difficult or flawed, we often fall into another trap, don't we? The escalation of commitment.
Yes, the escalation of commitment is a fascinating and destructive pattern.
How does it work?
Imagine an entrepreneur who pours significant time, energy, and money into a failing business venture. Month after month, the data comes back negative. Clear signs show the model is unsustainable.
Yeah.
A rational actor would look at the data, cut their losses, and pivot. But instead of walking away, they engage in excessive, agonizing deliberation. They search desperately for obscure justifications to stay the course.
Let me guess why. It all comes back to prospect theory and loss aversion.
Exactly. If they quit, the loss goes from being a theoretical possibility to a formalized reality. They have to admit they lost the money and the time.
And that hurts twice as much.
Because losses hurt twice as much as gains, they are terrified of the pain of making the wrong decision to officially quit, so they stay paralyzed in a failing loop.
Man.
They continuously pour new resources into an option that clearly isn't working, purely to avoid the emotional devastation of formalizing the loss.
It's the exact same paralysis, just looking different from the outside. Maria is paralyzed by the overwhelming friction of a poorly designed system and life's relentless demands. The entrepreneur is paralyzed by the fear of realizing a loss. The person staring at the GPS is paralyzed by the paradox of infinite destinations. And what's wild is that, on top of all the psychological traps and the systemic friction, we're also fighting our own physical biology.
Yes, this brings us to a fascinating field called chronobiology,
Right.
which is the study of our internal biological rhythms and chronotypes.
I was reading about this, and researchers have identified what they call our prime time.
Yeah.
This is a biological reality.
Yeah.
Everyone has a 2 to 3 hour window during the day where they have their absolute peak physical, mental, and emotional energy.
Yes.
This is when our prefrontal cortex is firing perfectly. We have our highest willpower, our sharpest focus, and our greatest cognitive flexibility.
That is the window where the brain is actually equipped to handle the heavy lifting of complex, anxiety-inducing decisions.
But look at how we actually live. Instead of ruthlessly protecting this prime time for the hard decisions, the life-altering choices we are avoiding, we waste it.
We throw it away.
We spend our prime time responding to low-stakes emails, sitting in pointless meetings, or scrolling through feeds. And then we try to tackle the heavy, terrifying choices during what researchers call our low time.
Which is the worst time?
We wait until 11 o'clock at night when our analytical brain is exhausted, our willpower is depleted, and the intention-action gap is at its widest. No wonder we choose inaction. We're asking a drained battery to start a cold engine.
We are setting ourselves up for failure by completely ignoring the reality of our own biological rhythms. We treat our energy as if it is a flat line throughout the day when it is actually a sharp curve.
So what does this all mean? If you are listening to this right now and you're recognizing yourself in the metaphor of the driver staring at the GPS, or in Maria's exhausted struggle against friction, or the entrepreneur refusing to let go of sunk costs, we need to reframe this completely. Because the natural, immediate human instinct when we look at our own unmade decisions is to feel a deep sense of shame. We look at our intention-action gap and we think, I am lazy, I am broken, I lack discipline, I have a motivation deficit.
And that is just not true.
I want to make this explicitly clear before we go any further. You are not broken. If you are stuck, if you are paralyzed by a choice, it is not a flaw in your character.
That is the most crucial takeaway of this entire conversation. It is not a moral failing. It is system design.
System design.
When systems, whether they are government portals, corporate structures, or our own personal daily routines, constantly demand affirmative, high-friction action from cognitively depleted humans, they set us up to fail.
Right.
Because, as we have seen through all of this research, the path of least resistance determines the vast majority of human behavior.
We follow the default. We flow where the gravity takes us.
We do, and there is a landmark piece of behavioral research that proves this beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Oh, the corporate savings one.
Yes, it's a study by Brigitte Madrian and Dennis Shea regarding corporate retirement savings plans. For years, the standard system required employees to actively opt in.
No.
They had to get the paperwork, read the dense financial jargon, make a complex choice about contribution percentages, and submit the form. It required massive cognitive load and affirmative action.
And what happened?
Participation was abysmally low. People intended to save, but they fell into the gap.
The acrasia of action.
Exactly. But then the researchers convinced companies to change just one thing. They switched the system to automatic enrollment. Saving for retirement became the default.
Oh, wow.
If you did nothing, you were automatically enrolled at a standard rate. If you wanted to not save, you had to actively opt out. You still had the exact same choices, but the friction was reversed.
So what happened?
Participation jumped by 50 percentage points.
50 percentage points.
Yeah.
Just by flipping the default setting?
Think about what that means. The people didn't change. Their inherent motivation didn't suddenly spike. They didn't attend a seminar on discipline and suddenly conquer their laziness.
Right.
The system simply aligned itself with human nature. It expected fatigue. It utilized the path of least resistance for a positive outcome. We need to build systems and design our own lives in a way that expects human fatigue, not robotic perfection.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Expect human fatigue. Design for the tired version of yourself, not the idealized version.
Yeah.
But beyond the logistics of system design, on a deeper, more philosophical level, we have to look at why these life decisions feel so heavy in the first place.
We do.
Let's go back to Maxim Gorky's novel, A Useless Man.
Okay.
The character Matvey is experiencing something profound. It is what we can call the terror of inconsequentiality. He watches the people around him living their lives. He sees them throwing themselves into political ideas, falling in love, building relationships, taking risks, and he feels a desperate hunger for that vibrancy. But instead of joining them, he says, I am sitting on the bank, unable to swim, afraid even to touch the water.
I want to focus on the word he uses there, not unable, afraid. That distinction is everything. He isn't lacking the physical or mental capacity to swim. He is paralyzed by fear.
Yes, he has the capacity, but the fear he feels is formless. It's not a fear of a specific predator.
Yeah.
It's the vast interior silence of the universe that whispers you are nothing.
Wow.
The fear of inconsequentiality is not a moral failing. It is a profoundly human response to the overwhelming, crushing weight of consciousness. We are finite creatures. We live for a tiny sliver of time, yet our brains have evolved to conceive of infinity.
It's a heavy burden.
We can imagine eternity, yet we know we are temporary.
Yeah.
Of course we freeze. Of course the terror of making a choice that defines our small, fragile life feels paralyzing. When you realize that every choice closes a door forever, the fear of making the wrong choice is entirely rational.
It is a completely rational response to an irrational existential situation. To be aware of your own mortality and the finality of choice is terrifying. But the trap is believing we need to resolve that fear or achieve perfect certainty before we can move.
And we never will.
No, we won't. And part of what keeps us trapped in that illusion of needing certainty is our own negative inner voice. If we look at the neuroscience of how the brain processes this existential dread, there is a mechanism called the phonological loop.
The phonological loop.
Our working memory manages verbal information. And when we are facing a high-stakes decision, our inner voice can literally hijack that cognitive space. When we are stressed about a choice, we zoom in too much, we lose all peripheral vision, we get cognitive tunnel vision.
The inner critic just takes a microphone, cranks up the volume, and won't let go. It repeats every possible negative outcome on a loop. What if you fail? What if they laugh? What if you lose the money?
Exactly. And the instinct is usually to fight back, to argue with the voice or try to suppress it through sheer force of will. But to break that paralysis, we don't need to try harder.
What do we need?
We don't need more willpower. We need psychological distance. Neuroscience and psychology show us several incredibly effective techniques to create this necessary space.
Like what?
One of the most fascinating is called the Solomon paradox.
Solomon paradox.
Yeah.
Like King Solomon.
Exactly. It's named after King Solomon from historical texts, who was renowned across the ancient world for giving incredibly wise, nuanced, and objective advice to other rulers and citizens. Yet when it came to his own life, his own kingdom, and his own family, his decisions were disastrous.
Because he was too close to it. He had tunnel vision for his own life.
Exactly. And we all do this. Think
Right.
about how easily you can see the clear path for your best friend. You give great advice when they are struggling with a career choice or a relationship. But you struggle with the exact same problems in your own life. By consciously adopting an outside view, by asking yourself, what advice would I give a friend who came to me in this exact situation? You bypass the amygdala's fear response. You dramatically reduce the emotional tension and allow the rational part of your brain to assess the reality.
You essentially step outside the tunnel vision by tricking your brain into thinking it's someone else's problem.
Yes. Another technique to create this distance is becoming a fly on the wall.
Okay, how does that work?
You literally close your eyes and imagine observing your own situation from a corner of the ceiling. Or becoming a time traveler, mentally jumping 10 years into the future and looking back at this exact moment.
Oh, that's interesting.
If you are looking back from a decade away, how will this decision actually feel? Will the email that is paralyzing you today even register as a memory?
That immediately lowers the stakes. It puts the specific terrifying choice back into the context of a long, continuing life. It shrinks the monster.
And perhaps the simplest, most immediately effective intervention of all is to just change your pronouns.
Change my pronouns.
When you are talking to yourself about a hard choice, stop using I and me. Stop saying, I can't do this, or what if I fail? Instead, use your own name or use the pronoun you.
Why does that help?
Studies show that just shifting the internal dialogue from I can't figure this out to you can figure this out creates just enough psychological distance to dial down the negative emotions. It moves you out of the panic zone and into a physiological state that researchers call calm energy.
Calm energy. I love that term. It's a state where you are activated and alert, but you are relaxed. You aren't frantic. You aren't operating out of desperation. That calm energy is where actual sustained action happens.
It is, because when we don't find a way to create that distance, when we refuse to step out of the tunnel vision and instead stay paralyzed by the weight of it all, we risk ending up exactly like Matt Vey.
Back to the novel.
There is a devastating realization he has later in the story, after years of sitting on the bank, afraid to touch the water. He looks back at his existence and says, I have lived my whole life as though I were waiting for something, and now I understand that I was waiting for myself, and I never came.
I was waiting for myself and I never came. That is absolutely haunting because it is the ultimate realization that the self you were waiting for, the ideal version of you who is perfectly ready, perfectly confident, entirely free of fear and doubt, never existed in the first place. You were waiting for a ghost to take the wheel.
We treat our lives as a perpetual prologue. We tell ourselves we are just getting ready to start the real thing.
Yeah.
We are gathering more information. We are keeping our options open. We are waiting for that moment of perfect clarity where the right choice shines with the golden light.
But the tragedy is that the getting ready is the life.
Exactly.
The waiting is the life you are living. The days you spend paralyzed in the car are deducting from the exact same finite account as the days you spend driving.
And this connects so perfectly back to that Reddit thread we started with. Another user responded to the original poster who was waiting for choices to make themselves.
What did they say?
The responder said, what looks like being careful is actually self-protection. If you never choose, you never have to be the person who chose wrong.
Oh, it is a brilliant, piercing observation. It completely exposes the illusion of perfect clarity. We think we are protecting our future by not committing, but we are actually just dodging the discomfort of the present moment. We're trying to preserve an unblemished record by refusing to play the game.
We really are.
So what is the ultimate insight here? What is the deeper connection underneath all the behavioral economics, the prospect theory, and the literary metaphors? It is the realization that identity is not the prerequisite for action.
No, it's not.
You don't have to figure out exactly who you are or resolve all your internal conflicts or have zero fear before you take a step. Identity is the residue of action. You figure out who you are by acting, by making the choice and dealing with the consequences.
Right.
The water of life doesn't care about your readiness. The current doesn't wait for your confidence. You build your character in the process of moving forward, not in the preparation for it.
Exactly. You do not need the absence of fear to move. You only need the willingness to move while you are still afraid.
We have covered so much ground today. Let's just sit with it for a moment and bring it all together without adding anything new. We explored the deep, silent ache of the intention-action gap and how acrasia isn't a moral weakness or laziness, but a breakdown in the very human process of choosing. We looked at how our brains are wired for loss aversion and how the heavy burden of analysis paralysis traps us in our own minds, magnifying tiny risks until they paralyze us. We saw through Maria's story how our systems punish human fatigue and how ignoring our biological chronotypes sets us up to fail.
And most importantly, we recognize that the cost of doing nothing is almost always the quietest but heaviest cost of all. Waiting for perfect conditions is an illusion that protects us from the fear of being wrong, but it costs us the profoundly beautiful experience of actually being alive.
So as you go through the rest of your day, or as you lay your head down tonight, I want you to think about one small decision you've been avoiding because you're waiting for perfect clarity. What if the clarity you are waiting for isn't something you can figure out in your head? What if that clarity is actually hiding on the other side of the decision? If this conversation felt true for you, if something in here landed, afterward, I'd love for you to subscribe to Leone Patterns so you never miss what we explore next. Leave a comment and tell us what he's bring up for you. We read every single one. We are building a community here, people who think about money differently. Not as a number to chase, but as a human experience to understand. You are not alone in this. We are genuinely glad you are here at Leone Patterns.
Same pace, same questions. See you then.